record and transcribe. And for the guests of the show, it's grayed out, but for somebody at the chamber, it may. There we go. We got it. Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen now, and Scott will take this away.
Yeah. Again, thank you all for joining, Anthony. I appreciate it, and we are excited to kind of get into this and go through a little bit of what we call RITA, which is Responsible IT Architecture. So we're going to play this two different ways. Anthony and I'll go back and forth a little bit on these slides. I'll kind of give the high level view, and then we'll dig in deeper with some things that Anthony will give some specific use examples and things like that. So at any point, if you all have questions, we will, you can put them in the chat and we'll get to them. This is the agenda. We have the Q&A at the end, but feel free to throw them in there at any point during this presentation if you have them. As we mentioned, I'm Scott Prime with Integris. Obviously, these two pictures were not only taken at different times of the year, but one of us was happy and one was indifferent, I guess. So, and as mentioned, I'm a solutions sales advisor. I work with companies around the country, small to medium businesses, in helping them with their IT. As we'll go through some things today. But certainly on the cyber side, it's 2023, and that's one of the larger issues that are out there for everybody. So we put this together with the intention of basically forming a foundation so that you can build on top of that and get your companies to where they need to be.
Awesome. And on my side, I spent the first 10 years of my career on the cyber insurance space. So what I call the reactive side of this business, where you get a cyber insurance policy in place, and an issue or an incident happens, and you call your insurance carrier to kind of pick up the pieces. The reason I switched over to the managed IT and managed cybersecurity side, for me personally, it was if I'm going to help small to medium-sized businesses fight this, what I'll call quote unquote war, I want to do it on the front side to help educate them and get the right solutions in place with the right providers so that we don't ever have to utilize our insurance policy. So I spent about 10 years understanding the legal language and all the claims behind cyber insurance, and then switched over to the managed IT side to help grow Integris and provide solutions across the country.
So, as we mentioned, what we call responsible IT architecture is basically just that. It's responsible architecture. It's built from the foundation up, and we'll go through some slides that kind of point out what we see as important foundational practices. Before I even get into that, I just wanted to ask Anthony what he sees or what he thinks before we get into some of these are actual foundational practices that are one important to companies that should be in place or that you've seen that have not been in place, kind of like you just said, especially when it comes to insurance.
Absolutely. So when doing this over the last 6 years, we saw a lot of organizations, especially on the small and medium size, struggling with cybersecurity, not knowing where to start, getting overly confused with the amount of vendors that are in the space, constantly being told that something else was more important than another solution to protect a different type of breach or incident than another breach or incident or threat vector. So as we've been doing this over the cross, 6 years now, from where we started to where we are now, we started to put together this responsible IT architecture framework for organizations to better understand, and also things that they could do today and tomorrow, and work within their budgets to get the foundational items in place. So when I think of foundational items, I think of like building a house. Like what do you need to have in place in 2023 based on the threat vectors, based on the cyber threat actors that are out there? Like what is that baseline? Not all the bells and whistles, and not the crazy solutions that a Target or a Microsoft or a large organization would buy. What are the base concepts that need to be in place? And how can you do that cost effectively? even to the point of some things being free. So we took our learnings over the last 6 years and put them into this framework that Scott and I will run through with all of you.
So this next slide, and I will give credit where it's due. I'm going to steal this from our chief product officer, but these are two different businesses. And the easiest way to think about it is, and we'll get into this, but business A is someone getting into a car and putting the seatbelt on. The seat, not only because it's the law, but because you know it protects you from anything that could happen down the road. So when we look at these two, business A, and you know, you can read through these for yourself, but they're in a position where they're ready for almost anything that can come their way, as far as policies and procedures being in place, knowing what the future looks like for them, what their budgeting is, and especially compliance. And like Anthony had just mentioned, when it comes to cyber insurance, it's getting more difficult to get without some things in place. And if you do get it without certain things in place, it's going to be a lot more expensive. And then business B being the crazy people who get in their convertible, no seatbelt on, and just start flying down the highway. And whatever happens is going to happen, and they'll deal with the consequences. So, two different ways to look at it. And I think most of us would probably err on being more prepared than not. So, it's a quick little example of what that looks like, but it starts to really talk to and get into what those practices and foundations are that you need to put in place and what they can lead to and how they'll help you.
So we talk about this internally, like in the IT services space. There's a concept called operational maturity, and it's all about how you structure your individual managed IT service provider. But the concept of operational maturity can be applied to any business, any organization out there, or any department within a business. So the concept of operational maturity is how are you approaching your day to day? Are you constantly behind and reacting, or are you being proactive and getting after things that know are coming down or that could affect you? And we think about this too in terms of technology. When we're going out to partner up with a local organization, we're looking at how do they think about technology? Is technology just a cost? Or is it something that they think they can utilize in their business to be more productive, to have their employees be more productive, to better service their clients? Some organizations go as far as thinking technology is an employee benefit, meaning I'm going to attract talent, especially younger talent, to join my organization because I want to provide them the best technology there so they can better serve my customers or do their job. We think about it the same way in the sense of the organizations we want to partner with are forward thinking and constantly evolving to the times that are changing. For business A, we have seen multiple different examples of smaller organizations that have partnered with us that have specifically utilized this framework to then go market themselves to get bigger and better customers. Two examples that come to mind are a small law practice of about 15 employees and an accounting practice with about 10 employees. Both of those organizations came to us and said, hey, we think we're doing pretty good, but we also think we could be doing better. And for the customers that we're looking to provide our services to, they're actually looking at larger organizations, maybe the 40 or the 50 person firm in town. How can we better compete with them? And one of their angles on that was to engage us on the technology side and then bring it to the compliance and regulatory side. And they worked with us over a period of, let's say, 6 to 9 months to get all the I's dotted and T's crossed. And now they use that strategically in their marketing to go out and get new revenue, to attract bigger and better clients that they can utilize to grow their firm. So one of the things that's my biggest complaint in cybersecurity is a lot of you and even myself have experienced the constant negative or fear marketing associated with it. And what I've always tried to do over the last, say, 2 years is let's switch the script and utilize it and say, this is going to protect your business. This is going to enhance your employees' experience. This is going to better serve your clients. And also, it's going to make you more marketable to the clients that you want to have. So we've seen two successful examples of that, at least I personally have. And it's just really a good foundation of like changing the mindset from a fear-based, scared mindset to a future-based, proactive, engaging mindset. So with that, Scott, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I think one other important thing, just also on that slide, you had mentioned going out and using it to get new business. On the compliance side, especially things coming downstream, it's important way to keep the current clients that you have and the current business that you have. So some different aspects to look at, but certainly being prepared. I think the next slide is a poll question, and you can answer this poll in the chat. But do you think that you're currently employing foundational practices at your business? And again, as Anthony said, it could be IT related. That's why we're here talking today. But just to think about where you're at and how you feel about the things that are in place to protect your company. And I guess, I don't know, we'll give it a couple minutes, 30 seconds.
Let's give it a minute, see if everybody's engaged. Are we putting people to sleep already? I can't see anybody's face because I'm sharing my screen. Otherwise, I would be picking on some names there to call out. But any questions or any answers to this, please put them in the chat. Use that feature. And if you do have questions based off of what we have already discussed, throw them in there as well.
So, so far the overwhelming majority is yes. Although Greg's
Awesome.
answer is fantastic. That just says very foundational. So I love that.
Good stuff. All right, let's keep it moving.
So this is Rita. This is responsible IT architecture, and we'll get into each one of these slides so that we don't, or topics, so that we don't spend a lot of time just dying on this slide. But these are the things we put together as the 9 basic foundations to get you to responsible IT architecture. So we'll hit on each one of these, and as we mentioned early on, kind of give you a little bit of an example and some case use studies for those. So let's start with the next slide. I believe the firewall. Hopefully everyone on the call at least knows what a firewall is, whether they have one in place or not. But this is, I think, the cornerstone to most things on IT, and just making sure that you're protected, not only for what's coming into your organization, but also where your people are going out to when it comes to the internet. But I wanted to ask Anthony specifically, as we go through, there's a couple different places this can come up, but we've also heard the term human firewall. So I wanted you to kind of make sure you hit on that or any other examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into this. So when I think about a firewall, I think of literally the edge of your network or the start of your network, especially if you have an office space. So if you're working out of an office or a building or anything like that, the first thing that happens is you have internet coming in and it's hitting something. Hopefully, as Scott mentioned, at least it's a firewall. Now, there's a lot of confusion about firewalls. You can sometimes get them, quote unquote, from your internet service provider. And they will tell you that you have a firewall. At the end of the day, most of the time, that's just a router, and it's not truly acting as a sophisticated firewall. The next version of this that we see is a box. Back in the day, firewalls were sold as boxes. So you purchased the box for a one-time fee. Most of the time, you probably had to pay somebody to install or configure it initially. They set that box up and they walked away, or the organization walked away, and it's just been sitting there and it's been in place. That version of firewall it still exists. You can still do that, but we like to say the firewall is only as good as the person who set it up. And sometimes that can be a little aggressive in statement, but from our findings over probably 1,000 different assessments of all different types of networks, we've seen organizations that have been given the correct advice. They've laid out the dollars to purchase the correct firewall, let's call it. And then we go in and assess or audit that environment, and none of the features, none of the security features are turned on. Why is that? And it's somewhat frustrating to a lot of organizations because they're listening to the advice they're getting, but they're not getting the product behind it. The reason for that is when you engage a what's called a next generation firewall properly, and you turn on all of the security settings within that firewall, it causes a lot of frustration or things to break in the environment. What do I mean by that? An end user is trying to connect to a printer. There is a new setting turned on the firewall, and it prevents that from happening. End users trying to get out to a certain website or service that they used to use, that firewall was properly configured and now that's blocked. What that means is that once all those security settings are set up, they need to be properly maintained slash adjusted so all the end users in the organization can still work properly while being properly secured. When what happens is because of that frustration, a lot of folks come in, set up a firewall basically, and enable everything. And a lot of times you just have this open pipe of data going back and forth through the internet with none of those features turned on. So you've paid for the device, but you're not getting any of the benefits of it. So that's a lot of times what we see is we see firewalls in place. Most of the time they're up to date, but we see all of those security settings that you've paid for not enabled. And the reason they're not enabled is because it causes some frustration or additional work that needs to be addressed so everybody can work properly. I'll pause there and I'll go into what Scott mentioned, which was the human firewall. So the human firewall is a new concept. I think even the chamber utilizes a solution called Know Before, which is continuously educating your not only the executives but also your staff on a continuously, it could be monthly, quarterly, or annual basis. It's a standard best practice. But the reason it works really well is because if you do that, the training in combination with phishing attacks from your organization, you start to train people on what to look for. They start to look at bad email addresses in the from or to line. They start to look at bad attachments or something they weren't expecting to get. Or they start to look at the body of the email and pick up on nuances of things spelled incorrectly or people talking differently via writing than they would in person. Um, Bringing up that those phishing attempts from a controlled or solution as well as that training module starts to allow all the users in the environment to be on high alert. And we can set up all the technologies in the world. We're never going to prevent a end user clicking on something, a bad link, a bad attachment, or going to the wrong site if they're not educated or trained up on it. So I'm sure there may be questions on that. We'll let them come through in the chat, but think of your network firewall as the first layer in defense of the internet coming into your organization, it protecting that traffic coming in. And then also the opposite is true of your users are going out to the internet. That firewall can also help protect them from going to wrong and dubious sites as well. So it's looking at traffic both ways, and it's really the edge of the network. The second piece is that human firewall, and that's like doing things like this. And that's why I'm so excited about what Kelly and the chamber are doing is that human firewall starts right here. It starts with all of you taking some time out of your day to come on here and learn about what's going on in the world of tech and cybersecurity.
So that's actually Carl had a question about the human side and what can we do better as employees or executives. But it kind of rolls right in, and it was answered a little bit in the chat. But Greg had a question coming from two different perspectives. One is two different actually companies, I guess, and one of those is going through WorkSmart, and he was wondering, if they have a firewall in place, what his exposure is to that. To which Nick Bain came back and answered that they don't, and that's kind of up to you to get either a VPN in place or something to protect your side. So I don't know if you want to speak to one, I guess, how to recognize, if there is a way to recognize, if something's set up, if you're going through WeWork or WorkSmart or whatever that may be.
Yeah, absolutely. So number one is to ask, right? And I'm actually going to broaden this out past just work smart, and I'm going to call it third-party companies that you engage with. These could be third-party software companies where like a CRM system that you store clients' data. It could be third-party companies like a QuickBooks where you store your financial data or your customer records. It could be a WorkSmart in sense of engaging with Office Space. There's other angles on this. There's moving and storage companies. A lot of breaches have happened because somebody invited a moving and storage company in to move their office from one space to the next, and those folks stole data that way. Where I'm going with this on third parties is you have to trust and you also have to verify. So a lot of you may start getting what's called third party vendor risk assessments or questionnaires. We've seen some that are over 250 questions asking, our client who's a vendor of another organization, all of these, what we're talking about today. Do you have these layers in place? If so, who maintains them? Who owns them? Who has the ability to change them? All these things go into play. So my general answer is if you're using third parties, you need to be asking them a basic list of questions at the low end and maybe a more intensive list at the high end, depending on what they have access to and what type of data you're giving them on what are they doing for their security. I'll go back to my insurance days real quick. And in the legal language, it didn't matter. Like, think of a small accounting firm that are doing tax returns for local businesses. Even if I'm that accounting firm and I take the client's data, their tax returns, their financial documentation, and I put it into a third party software to help me file that tax return, enter the data, blah, 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 the client per se, the business that gave you that information, doesn't know what you're doing with that data. They have no idea what software you're using to run their tax return. What they do know is that they trusted you with their data. And the law states at the end of the day, because of that trust that they were giving to you, it is up to you to make sure that those third parties that you interact with to do your business are protecting that data. And if you are not, or if they are not, you are still going to be held responsible because you are the one that took in that client and their information, their data, and they trusted you as the point. So a lot of organizations should think through that of you don't want to be the reason you're the talk of the town because you had an incident or one of your vendors had an incident that released all of your clients' information, and now you're the focus of the town because of an issue like that. You can have all the best practices in place, but if you're not verifying what your vendors have in place, like I said, even a moving and storage company could be an issue for you.
All right. And I appreciate the questions. Thank you for those. So the second step in our little process is backup strategy. And this, again, goes towards whether you're working with a current MSP or if you're doing this on your own. There are a couple things that we think are very important. And those are RPO, which recovery point objective, and RTO. And you can read through these again. But basically, RPO is saying, how much information can I lose before it impacts my business negatively? And the answer to that could be a myriad of different things, and it could be I can't lose anything. But it's something that you need to talk about and have a plan in place for. Same with RTO, which is recovery time objective, and that gets into if we were to go down or if one of our critical systems went down, how much time can we be down again before it starts to impact our business in a negative way? So for some companies, again, that's, we want backups every hour. Some need them once a day, once a week. Again, it's internal talks that need to be had to make sure that you know where you're at and what you're willing to either lose or how much time you're willing to be down. And that will start to, again, build that foundation to make sure that you're in a place where if something catastrophic does happen, you know that you're covered and you can get the information that you need to get back up and running. And I'm sure Anthony's got examples of this, but this comes up all the time. unfortunately, because a lot of it could just be a loss of electricity that takes you down for a little while. But you need to have a plan in place for that. Excuse me.
Yeah. So, recovery point objective, as Scott mentioned, if our systems go down, if we're to get breached, if we're to, have a power outage or a flood, whatever the case may be, how much data are we okay with losing from our last backup? So I'll give you a standard example. Most I think our standard solution is a recovery point objective of 59 minutes, meaning every single hour the backup solution is going to run. And if it runs at 11 a.m., it's not going to run again until, let's call it, 12 p.m. So if everything fails at 11:59 a.m., I haven't yet had that 12 o'clock run hit. So I've now lost 59 minutes worth of work or data. You can apply that principle across all of your different solutions or anywhere that you store data to say, is that enough or is it not enough? We work with customers that don't need that, their RPO could be 24 hours. That's a little aggressive, in my opinion. It should probably be an hour at most, but they're more comfortable with it. We have other organizations that can't lose a second of data, meaning their RPO is less than 1 second, meaning they are taking snapshots continuously to make sure they never lose any data. On the next point, recovery time objective, as Scott mentioned, if I go down, how much time, how long is it going to take us to get back up and running? The interesting thing about RTO, recovery time objective, is that you can apply that principle to all of the different things you utilize in your business to run it. So you could break out phones, you could break out email, you could break out financials, you could break out customer service request lines, right? There's probably a different RTO for each one of those things. For a business that doesn't rely heavily on phones, they may be able to be down for 24 hours. But for a business that relies heavily on phones to take user requests like us, our phone system can never be down. So we have a different RTO on our phone system or on our support email address than we do for that versus other businesses. The main problem that we see here, that Scott and I see here, or Deborah sees here, is there's no talk between the executive leadership team or the ownership team and the technology, either provider or internal resource. The executive or ownership team thinks it's X, and the IT, internal IT, or a managed service provider like ourselves thinks it or knows it's Y. And those two never communicate about the importance of this. One of our goals is to make sure that we're lining this up for all of you so that it is clear this is what these two objectives are. And do you want us to improve it? Are we good? Or do we need to invest more money to make it even better? Those are the two things on the recovery point objective, recovery time objective. A final statement on this is the following. A lot of organizations will quickly tell Deborah or Scott or myself that we do backups. That's the standard answer we get of we do backups. When we dive into that question a little bit more, when was the last backup run? Well, I think we do it daily. Okay. Have you ever tested that daily backup? Meaning, have you actually gone into the file that is the backup file and see if it was properly run? Most of the time, the answer to that second question is no. There's been no verification that that 24-hour backup has been done. The third question, which takes you even one step further, is have you ever restored from a backup file? And that is the problem point right there. We've seen multiple of times of people believe they have backups in place. They believe it's running every 24 hours. But then when a critical issue happens, a power outage, a hurricane, whatever the case may be, all of a sudden they go to restore and they can't do it. They can't pull it off. That's very important that you're asking those three questions when thinking about backup strategy.
And we actually, it's perfect for this. We got a question. If there was a strategy to prevent your backups from being compromised in an attack, especially if it's the malware's been dormant for days. One, I just wanted to hit on, as we've talked about in some other webinars, usually threat actors are, in there for months. I think 6 months is the average before they
Yeah.
actually do anything or try anything. So there's a lot of things going on that need to be checked out and looked at before. And that, like you had mentioned, restoring those backups is one way to make sure that, hopefully this doesn't get to that point, but those are working correctly. And those are very important points.
Yep. One more quick one on that, and then Scott, I think we are going to have to probably push a little bit quicker because we
Yep.
didn't think we were going to take all the time, and I'm getting mouthy, so we got to move. You always want 3 copies of your data. You want a physical copy, an off-site copy, physical, and then an off-site cloud. You want usually your data in 3 different forms to make sure that you can recover it in a couple different ways. A lot of times you have the data and your copy of that data is in the same office that the backup solution is running in, and there's no cloud offsite. So if you have some sort of natural disaster, all of a sudden it's like everything was perfect with my backups, but I can't physically get to them. That becomes another issue. So multiple dimensions when you're talking about a backup and disaster recovery strategy.
So internet security and content filtering is really just that. Having policies in place and knowing what your users can and cannot get to, and that varies for every company. Some, easy examples are people not being able to get to YouTube or Twitter or things like that. But you also have some, and my brother's a perfect example. He's an electrician. Sometimes he needs to look up something on YouTube to see how it's done. So you need to kind of think about those things ahead of time and then build a plan around that and make sure that the right people have the right access to the things they need, but then also protecting yourself from other websites that generally nobody would probably want. And it's easier than just, bad websites that we all know about. There are some places that you probably don't want your employees going.
Absolutely. Yeah. Quick couple things on this is you can block foreign countries that your users in your organization have no reason to ever go to. A couple that come to mind are Russia, China, North Korea. There's no reason any endpoints, any users, any desktops in your environment need to get to those because you don't do business with them, you don't trade, you don't do any of those things. So simple little things you can do to prevent a human error from happening. Clicking a bad link, downloading a bad attachment, going to a fishy website. This is the solution that you can put in place to make sure that you're protecting your users. As Scott mentioned, you can utilize this for production or productivity as well. You can block things like Facebook, YouTube, all those types of things. We don't advocate for that, meaning us as your provider doesn't matter to us. That's a business decision, but it is a solution that can do that type of stuff as well.
So endpoint protection is just that. It's making sure that each individual endpoint or device is not only monitored but secure. And I've heard some people talk about it's just antivirus, which there are some similarities to antivirus, but it's taking a next step into some next generation protections for threat actors and 0-day kind of things to get in there. So another very important point, but this is one of the maybe besides the firewall way that you can monitor your system or your MSP can to make sure that things are protected, and just keep an eye. And if they see some things running on a device that are out of the usual or out of the norm, can lock that device down and move on from there and try and relegate that to not being a breach. I think we call them events.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that comes up here, actually, that I forgot to mention on the internet security and content filtering side is once our teams become more remote or we have a hybrid workplace or we want to work from anywhere in the world, all of a sudden we stop utilizing the protection behind that firewall that we've now, properly secured and configured. Now our users and our organization no longer have that protection. As soon as I move outside of that environment and I'm in my house or in a hotel somewhere. So what's the next most important thing as we move into this remote hybrid work world that we're all now in? And number one is the actual endpoint. So internet security and content filtering, that solution follows your user no matter where they are to protect them. Endpoint protection is another one. That's going to stay on that actual device and it's going to travel with them wherever they go. Scott mentioned the concept of zero-day vulnerabilities, but you used to have traditional based antivirus systems. Think about McAfee back in the day. And that was all based on definitions. The definition meaning the McAfees of the world knew the vulnerable code that was being released. They could adjust their program and then they could update it on your system, and you would now be secure against that newest version of that malware or that code. What has happened in recent years is that those cyber threat actors have gotten so good at manipulating that code at a very high frequency and speed that those traditional based systems just could not keep up anymore. So what they started to transition to is a next gen, some people call it AI, machine learning, antivirus systems, where they are actually based on the user's behavior. So the antivirus system knows that Anthony comes on and opens up X amount of tabs every day, X amount of browsers, uploads X amount of data, downloads X amount of data. Whenever I step outside of that norm or that profile, it will take me offline and separate me from the network. So one, I can't infect myself, and two, I can't infect the rest of the environment. So it's looking at your behaviors versus a definition.
Email security. This one might be the most fun just because almost all of us are probably guilty of maybe clicking on something or coming close to it. But this is where phishing campaigns come in and things like that. And to say that things have gotten more sophisticated and advanced is probably an understatement. They're really good these days at pretending to be somebody in the company, pretending to be someone outside the company that you usually work with, and just trying to get information and making those emails look like they're coming from legitimate sources. So training, obviously, I think we had talked about no before earlier on, but is vital in this specific step just to make sure that employees know, or at least have an idea that if an email looks just a little off, it's worth taking a closer and deeper look at and at least reporting that. So, we could all go through the stories of someone clicking on a link to change from the CEO to change payday numbers or something like that. And then it's over at that point. So
Yep, a lot of these built-in systems, Microsoft, Google will have built-in email security features. They're good. It's better than nothing. But from our world, what we've experienced is this is one area where you do want to go outside of the built-in and you want to get a third-party provider or vendor for this solution that only does this. We've seen way better results and things getting stopped by that third-party solution. So it basically routes your emails through that email security vendor. It clears that security vendor before it makes it to your inbox. When it makes it to your inbox, Microsoft or Google will also run it through theirs. It causes no delay in email communication, but it's that one more layer that's in place via a third party that just focuses on being an expert in that realm of email security and what to look for.
So multi-factor authentication is just that. It's different methods of authenticating who you are. And as you read down here, there's the usual things of something and something you have. So something would be that password, and something you have can be either that token or a fingerprint, face scan, things like that. So this is very important, and anyone that we work with or want to work with needs to have MFA in place to be secure and for us to feel secure in supporting that environment.
A lot of times, Scott, we get hit with like, I have this on my bank, or I have this somewhere on my cell phone, or the executives are frustrated because they have to do all these different things to get into certain things. If this is done correctly, it can be a seamless experience, and it is mandatory that you put this in place. It is just the one. It's kind of tagging the virtual world with the physical world to make sure that there's at least two levels of verifying that you are you before anybody gets there. So it's extremely important. It's why almost every provider is making it mandatory nowadays, and your cyber insurance providers as well.
So next, least privilege access, and I'll let Anthony really get into this one, but basically we have seen it time and time again where end users have access to things that they should just never have access to, or never don't have a need to have access to. So making sure that you have policies in place for this, and that people are being able to go where they need to go, and not go where they shouldn't go.
Yeah, so the number one thing we see when we go into any environment is administrative rights on local end users' computers. It could be as much as 10% of the environment, it could be much as 100%. And the standard answer is I want to be able to download a file, I want to be able to download a program or do custom things on my computer. And as soon as I hear that, I say, you know enough to be dangerous, right? They know enough of how to download a program or to update something or whatnot, but not enough to fully protect the organization. So we look to have no admin rights on any computer. We say our standard line here is our CTO, our chief product officer, our CEO know a little bit about cybersecurity, and none of them have admin rights on their computer. Same thing with all of our cybersecurity engineers. They don't have admin rights on their computers, even though that's what they do day in and day out. And the reason is it's a best practice. If they need to do something that requires admin credentials, they have a separate and distinct credentials to do that. They use those credentials to do what they need to do, and then they switch back to their everyday user credentials. If somebody clicks on something wrong or downloads a virus or ransomware, this prevents that ransomware or that virus from being able to be executed across the entire network. That's the number one thing that happens. Somebody has admin rights to the network, they clicked on something bad, and boom, it's over. The next one is Active Directory. So the example here is you go into Microsoft Active Directory, which is all your users and their email addresses, and they have the ability to access any file, any document, or whatnot. A lot of times the users don't know that they do, but if they do a little bit of digging or Googling or YouTubing, they can figure it out. I'll give the example of sales guy Anthony back in the day. There was no reason I needed access to Integris's financial data, right? That was for the accountants, that was for the controller. There's no reason for me to have access there. By not properly looking at least privilege, of the concept being you have enough access to do your job and work productively without getting the organization in trouble.
So patching, this is one we love in the MSP world. It's free security, and hopefully everyone knows what it is. But it's any software that you're using, Microsoft, QuickBooks, any of that kind of stuff. If they know there's a vulnerability in their code or their software, they'll send out a patch. You just simply click the little button, kind of like you see on the right-hand side of the screen when you restart or turn off your computer, and it updates your system. So these are very important, but it's also probably more important to make sure that they're actually getting done. I've been in trouble before for not clicking on the box early enough to restart and reboot my computer. So I don't know that there's too much more we want to get into.
Yeah, no, that's it. We could keep it moving, but think of this as free security, right? There's nothing you need to buy here. Microsoft, Adobe, Java are constantly releasing patches to update their systems. It's free. You just got to do it. And how many people in your environment just say ignore, ignore, ignore? We got to stop that. There's ways to manage that process so it happens and even mandates it at a certain point after, two ignores.
So this last slide before we get into some of the assessment issues is important, and it's one of the things we do during what we call an assessment, and it's going through and taking account and inventory of your entire environment, making sure that your devices are, if they're of a certain age, that they're still supported by the manufacturer, still have a warranty on them. They're also running the correct software that they need to be running, and if they're not, then we need to address that and get things fixed.
Absolutely. So this is the final one here. We've gone into a ton of environments that are running programs on Server 2003, Server 2008, and now Server 2012. Those systems are no longer being supported or updated by the original manufacturers, and that means they are just a sitting duck. All of the threat actors know this, and they specifically target those things. So just by removing them and staying up to date, you can prevent a significant amount of attacks. I'm going to quickly, just be due to time, I'm going to quickly run through the next few slides and do apologize, but we wanted to give you real examples of all the things we just discussed. So how do we start? That's a typical question of like, how do we even start? How do we know where we stand on everything that you all just talked about? So we have a standard assessment process that Deborah, who's in Longview, can specifically walk all of you through. We put a sample statement of work on here so you guys can understand how encompassing this is, how intensive it is. We're typically going to spend approximately up to a day on site with the organization, and we're going to simply take your current state. Where do you sit today? What is true around all of these things that we just mentioned, and a few others that aren't part of responsible IT architecture? We're then going to compare your current state to the future state. If you were to have all these things in place, what gaps exist? We're then going to take those gaps and we're going to put it into what's listed on here, an executive summary report, and it's based on business impact. And I think that's the Kelly had talked to us prior to coming on here of like, speak in layman's terms. Don't get too technical. And my biggest thing with our assessment is how do we communicate these gaps to all of you in terms of business impact? Meaning, if I don't have this in place and the issue or the gap is made aware or becomes vulnerable and causes me an issue, how much time, literally hours, am I going to be down? Is it a week? Is it 5 days? Is it one business day? So we list all of those gaps out in business impact. And then we like to say all businesses have and organizations have different budgets. Some have the ability to address all those gaps on day one. Some of them need that roadmap so they can start to break off chunks of it over time. We are completely cool with that. But if you're wondering, like, I have these gaps, they exist, where do I start? This is the best bang for your buck in terms of delivering and understanding a roadmap and even budgetary numbers so you can begin to plan out 2023 and maybe even 2024.
And I think right before I answer this question, but you may have answered this as a question from Carl, and then there's another one that I'd like to get. But he asked, what is the business impact of not following the foundational practices? And I think you touched on that a little bit. Not only is it time and money, but it's productivity. So I didn't know if you wanted to hit anything else on that. But then the other question was going back to the patching. What's the risk of fraud in this area? People posing as one of the companies, Microsoft, whoever, with a fraudulent patch.
Awesome. So I'm gonna stop my screen share here. Maybe people could real quick before we get into those questions, Scott. Just
Yep.
one of the questions here was, are you interested in learning more about responsible IT architecture? We had to hit this pretty quickly. Obviously, there's a lot that can go into this. Deborah on our team can help address these things. But if you are, throw a quick yes in the chat, and we'll talk with the chamber afterwards. With that, I'm going to end my slideshow so I can see some faces and also answer any of those additional questions. All right, go ahead, Scott. What the one was scamming on patching?
Yeah. So what's the risk of a company's or a fraudulent patch?
Yeah, there's potential to be very high, right? I think McAfee used to get in a lot of trouble with this as they were constantly being scammed, and you potentially have McAfee on your home workstation or something like that. The answer is it's very high. This is where you want to work through. We have a specific tool set. It's called a remote monitoring and management agent. We stick it on every single computer in the environment and server, and we're able to understand that environment and deliver those patches through that agent so that it's a controlled process and it's done repetitively. If you don't have a solution like that in place, you'd want to be very careful about going to the like say it's a Microsoft patch, going to the Microsoft website specifically to get that patch. Adobe is another example, making sure you're on Adobe's actual website to get the correct patch for the system that you have.
And the other question, which I think, as I mentioned, you may have gotten into, but just the impact of not having some foundational practices in place.
Absolutely. So the reason we put those items in responsible IT architecture is because we think they have pretty big business impact. There's a laundry list of other vendors and other solutions that are out there floating around that you could also consider. We believe that responsible IT architecture, those 9 items, are the foundational items, and most of those things, if they don't exist, you're going to be down for a little while. And then I start to think about revenue. The other thing I start to think about is wages. Usually, when a business is down, the employee wages that they have to continue to pay, whether people are working or not, especially if they're salaried employees, becomes very significant. So those are the 2 main things that I start to think about.
And I think, and I'll finish it off with this because I've heard you say it before. Maybe a third is just reputation. Your business reputation takes a huge hit when someone
Yep.
knows that you've been breached, hacked, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, quick example on that, and then Kelly can shut me down. Reputation, it's very hard to quantify. So the best example I have of that is Equifax, one of the credit score companies, got breached 2 or 3 years ago. Equifax is a publicly traded company, and I forget what their valuation was. I want to say it was a $5 billion valuation. They lost $1 billion in valuation overnight within 1 week. And I don't say that we're not $1 billion company. We're nowhere close. We're not valued at that. So I hate using big companies as examples in these scenarios. But what it does show you is that it was about a 20% hit. So what I like to say, any organizations, SMB organizations, is could you take a 20% hit on your revenue and survive it? Could you take a 20% hit and keep all of your current employees? Those are the types of questions I think about. Could you lose 20% of your client base overnight and stay in business? So that's the way I think about the reputational hit to try and quantify it. And with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop. We're happy to answer any additional questions offline, but really thank the chamber a lot, Kelly, Catherine, John, all of you for providing us this opportunity. And I was told we were the guinea pigs.
Oh, John, you might be muted.
Wow.
That might be. You are muted.
Yeah. Look at that. I can speak. I can be heard. Anyway, thanks so much for that. Definitely appreciate everyone's time and attention. Great questions, great content. Any follow-ups, I'm sure Integris will be happy to hear from you. We do have next month's Tech Talk scheduled for February 28th. Please make sure you register then. We will be continuing our cybersecurity discussions with some practical applications that you can do. And so I'll be the presenter. So look forward to that. Right? Yay. Anyway, Kelly, anything else? I think my check boxes are done.
I just appreciate everyone getting on the call so quickly today, and we want to respect your time by ending right at 3 o'clock. Enjoy the weather. We may even see some snowflakes before the end of the day. Have a good one. Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.